In 1969, when I was almost 16 years old, an exhibition opened at the Metropolitan Museum of Art called Harlem on My Mind. The exhibition was controversial for a number of reasons, but mainly around the issue of who was being allowed to author the experience of this African American community. Vocal members of the Black and Harlem community felt that their voices were not being given serious consideration in the shaping of this exhibition about their community. And so when the exhibition opened, picket lines were formed in front of the Met. As a socially and politically engaged young person, I heard about this controversy. It had spilled over into the media, on the radio, and local press. And I decided that I wanted to go see what the controversy was about. And so, one Saturday morning, I told my mother that I was going into Manhattan from our home in Jamaica, Queens, to the Metropolitan Museum to see the Harlem on My Mind exhibition. I don't recall exactly what she said, but she probably said, "Be careful, and just make sure you're home in time for supper." Now, I had never been to a museum exhibition at that point on my own, having only been to museums with class field trips. And the school bus, as you know, drops you right in front of the museum. You get off, line up, follow the kid ahead of you, and you end up inside of the museum. But this is going to be a little different, so I took the bus to the subway, got on the subway from Queens, going into Manhattan, and began to find my way to the Met. As it turns out, I was on an express train. The Met was a local stop. I ended up at 125th Street, crossed the platform again, rode back, ended up at 59th Street in Columbus Circle, at which point I decided to get off at Columbus Circle and walk through Central Park to the museum. As fate would have it, when I got to the museum, there were no demonstrations. Maybe they had taken the weekend off. Maybe I was too early. Maybe I was too late. But at any rate, I decided to go into the museum to see the exhibition. In all honesty, I'm not sure if the picket lines had been there that I would have gone into the museum. I remember the experience of stepping into the lobby of the Met as a very intimidating one. So much so that I was way too nervous to walk up to the info desk and ask someone, "Excuse me, can you tell me where the Harlem on My Mind exhibition is?" As I looked around, it appeared to me that everyone walking around knew where they were going. So I decided I would walk around and act like I knew where I was going. And hopefully, I would find the exhibition. I turned left and walked through the Egyptian galleries. I stopped, looked at the mummies and other objects there, and then casually walked on, hoping to see a sign that said, Harlem on my mind. As I exited the gallery and looked to my right, I saw a sign for the exhibition. I followed that sign upstairs and stepped into the exhibition space and stood momentarily transfixed. It was the first time that I had ever seen an exhibition of photographs in any context. And to see photographs of ordinary African Americans hanging on the wall, in some cases hanging from the ceiling, and people standing and looking at these photographs was an experience that I can say changed my life. It gave me a sense of what I might do with the camera that I had gotten from my godmother the year before. As a direct result of that exhibition, and also because of my own family's history, I decided in 1975 to begin photographing in Harlem, New York. My mother and father had met in Harlem, and at that time we still had a number of family members and other friends who lived in the community. But when I was born, we moved out to Jamaica, Queens. So I wanted to reestablish, as it were, my connection to this community by making photographs there. And so, in 1975, I started spending time photographing in Harlem. I wanted to make a group of photographs of the men, women, and children in that community that conveyed their humanity. Because there's been a long history of visualizing Black urban communities through a lens of pathology. I spent 5 years photographing in Harlem, and when that work was completed, I decided I wanted to have an exhibition of that work in that community. So I approached the Studio Museum in Harlem to ask if they would be interested in exhibiting this work. I wanted the people in the community to be able to have the opportunity to see my photograph of them on the wall so that they could see themselves represented in that way. And so in November of 1979, my exhibition, Harlem, USA, opened at the Studio Museum in Harlem. And a lot of the people from the community did come, along with other people who visited the museum. And then, at that point, once that work was launched, I had to ask myself, what comes next? Another beginning. In 1969, when I was 11 years old, my parents brought home a book called The Movement. It was a book of photographs of and about the civil rights movement with text by the writer and playwright Lorraine Hansberry. There were a number of photographs in that book, including some that were quite horrific, including this photograph of a young girl lying in a hospital bed with her eyes bandaged. That photograph seared itself into my psyche. I guess you could say, for me, there was the world before this photograph and the world after this photograph. The photograph represented, I guess, all of the things that my parents had been trying to shield and protect me from up until that point. This girl was Sarah Collins, and she was the sister of Addie Mae Collins, one of the 4 girls who were killed in the dynamiting of the 16th Street Baptist Church on September 15, 1963. The 4 girls were killed, and Sarah Collins, the girl in that photograph, was wounded and partially blinded. About 10 years ago, that photograph came rushing back, and I sat bolt upright in bed one morning. I had heard that expression, sitting bolt upright, before, but I never really knew what it was until that morning when that photograph got shaken loose from wherever I had placed it and came rushing back. And something told me I needed to go to Birmingham, Alabama. So I contacted the Birmingham Museum of Art to ask if they would be interested in partnering with me on the work that I might do there, and to consider exhibiting that work when it was completed. At that time, I had absolutely no idea what I might do, how to make work about something that had happened in the past, in the contemporary moment. But the museum invited me down, and that began 7 years of visiting Birmingham, Alabama, getting to know the community, doing research, engaging the history, allowing, just as importantly, the community to get to know me. As part of my research, I spent time at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, and it was there that I found out that not only had 4 girls been killed that morning, but 2 boys had been killed in the violent aftermath that only began with the dynamiting of the church. So with that information, the conceptual shape of the work that I might do there began to form. And I decided that I would make photographs of young people who were the same ages that those 6 young people were who had been killed that morning. The girls were 11 and 14, and the boys were 13 and 16. And along with that, I would make photographs of adults who were the ages that those 6 young people would have been 50 years later had they not been killed. And then I would later pair these photographs, which have been made separately, into diptychs, with each diptych representing 50 years. The adults that I photographed, of course, 50 years ago, were the ages of those 6 young people. Some of them knew one or more of the 4 girls, and some of them remembered hearing the explosion that morning. So they were the living embodiment of that history. I had an exhibition of this work that opened at the Birmingham Museum of Art in September 2013, almost exactly 50 years to the day of that tragic moment in 1963. The people that I photographed came, saw the work, and for the adults, it was a particularly resonant moment because during the 1960s, like most institutions in the South, the Birmingham Museum was a segregated institution. Ultimately, at that point, allowing its black citizens to enter the museum one day a week on a day that was set aside called Negro Day. So I don't think any of those adults ever expected to see photographs of themselves hanging in that institution. So an idea is just the beginning. It's not the work itself. The work begins with a rigorous process of making and engaging that hopefully leads to something more than what one might have expected. Otherwise, what results, rather than a resonant object, idea, or experience, is merely the illustration of an idea. In 1969, I had the idea to go to the Met to witness controversy, to see the demonstrations. Instead, I had an experience that changed my life, that set me on the path for what has become my life's work.